So I'm Gabby, I'm digital marketing at Caravan Coffee Roasters, and I'm here today with Andrea, who's our head of coffee. I'm going to talk a little bit about roast profiling. So first things first, why do we need to roast our coffee?
It's a good question. Why we need to roast coffee? Well, first of all, coffee actually isn't a bean, like you think of like a legume. It is actually a seed. So like most seeds, it's very hard and dense and wouldn't taste like much if you tried to eat it raw. So in order to make it soluble in water, we have to roast it so that it becomes brittle and capable of breaking down and becoming the beverage that we love.
Okay, so when you're talking about seeds, then what does coffee look like before it's roasted?
Yeah, coffee is actually a very it's not a very exciting product before it's roasted. It's flavorless and tasteless. It's actually green, and it comes grown. Actually, it's grown on a tree, a small tree, and it is grown inside of a cherry, very similar to the cherries that you get from the supermarket. And it matures on the tree for about 3 to 6 months. And once it's actually picked, it becomes removed from the cherry, and it's dried, and it's carefully processed, and then packed up and shipped to us here in the UK.
So what do we do when it arrives here? Like, what is the process with the roasting machine?
When it arrives here, the roasting process really just starts with the quality control department, and we taste it and sample the coffee when it arrives to make sure it hits our quality specifications. And then when it does go into the production, so it goes into the roastery, we design a roast profile. And so we'll talk a bit about roast profiling, because each coffee actually gets a slightly different set of parameters in order to make it taste the way we want.
So what are the stages of roasting?
So roasting involves 3 main stages. First of all, green coffee is very dense and also very high humidity, very high moisture. So the normal state of coffee when it is shipped to us is about 10 to 12% water weight. And coffee needs to lose that water before it is able to be consumed. So that's a majority of the first third to a half of the roasting process is going to be just the water leaving the coffee. Then we're going to go through a phase they call it the Maillard phase, which is where coffee begins to go through sugar browning. It also starts to have those organic acids combine, recombine, and break down. And then finally we do something called the development phase, and that's any time after the first crack. So first crack, if you ever have a chance to watch coffee roasting, there's a period about 2 or 3 minutes before the final product, before the coffee is done roasting, where it goes through a very audible crack, like a popcorn pop. It's quite nice, and that signals that the coffee has gone through a very strong exothermic reaction where it starts to very quite violently expel a lot of energy. And during that point, from then until the end of the roast, that's what we call the development phase, and that's when you get the most nuanced flavor development that you will see in the coffee, in the final product.
So we roast it to get the flavour out.
Yeah.
So how does the roast affect the flavours that come out?
So there's 2 answers to that question. We do roast it to get the flavor out. It's a very good way to put it, because without roasting it wouldn't taste like much, like I said. But there's 2 ways that flavor is created in coffee. One of them is at the farm level when it's grown, and that has a lot to do with the care that the farmer takes. So she will use special picking, so picking the ripest fruit, taking a lot of care with the trees as they're growing throughout the year, and then being very meticulous about how that coffee is handled after it's been picked. So making sure the processing is very exact. And all of that has a lot to do with the way that coffee tastes, and that's why we talk a lot about the farmers that we work with, because a lot of the work that goes into that is the reason why we have delicious coffee. The second part of the way the coffee tastes is the roasting process, and the roasting process imparts a lot of its own flavors. So coffee contains quite a lot of sugar, so when you are roasting coffee, you are also kind of cooking that sugar, you're browning that sugar in a similar way you would do with baking. You're also assisting the coffee in going through a lot of chemical changes, and those changes involve the recombination, breakdown, and recombination again of organic acids. So a lot of the acidic qualities in coffee come from the roasting process as well. And the other part would be just the cellulose breakdown. So much of the kind of way that we experience the body of coffee, the thickness of coffee, comes from the amount of celluloid breakdown in that coffee as well. So there's many different things that happen in the roaster, but I'd say that the first and most foundational part of a coffee's flavor comes from the farm.
When we talk about coffee, we tend to use light and dark roast as well. So what is the difference between those?
So light and dark roast are just differences in the same process, really, because the roasting process is similar pretty much every time you do it. And that just involves taking coffee from its kind of, room temperature state, taking it up to about between 200 and 220 degrees Celsius, and depending on where in that process you stop, so how long you bake your cake, it will be anywhere from a relatively light, acidic, and bright, fruity coffee, all the way through to a very dark, bitter, dark chocolate, kind of roasty flavored coffee. And so there is no just perfect light and perfect dark, there's a spectrum, but that's basically the difference, is how long it spends in the roaster.